Pushpalata Bangre. Well, good morning, everyone. We have been talking about the language of paradox, a critical essay by the American critic and professor Clint Brooks. He was a new critic, and we understood that he revolutionized the study of poetry in American higher education. In this essay, which was the part of the well-wrought of 1947 by Brooks, he talks about the importance, the significance of studying paradox in the study of poetry. Rather, he, through this essay, lays out his argument for the centrality of paradox, the importance or significance of paradox, by showing, demonstrating that paradox is the language appropriate and inevitable to poetry. So it is something which cannot be avoided, it is inevitable. And further, we understood what he means by paradox. So, paradox refers to a literary device which consists of the anomalous juxtaposition of incongruous ideas for the sake of striking exposition or unexpected insight. We understood yesterday lecture. So by combining incongruous or what we call dissimilar ideas, the writer, the poet tries to bring a kind of unexpected thing in front of the readers. I told you the example of Dr. Samuel Johnson, who makes a very popular statement, paradoxical statement. Uh, there is marriage has no pains, but there is no uh, celibacy has no pleasures. Marriage has many pains. I'm sorry for that. Marriage has many pains, but celibacy has no pleasures. So this is a paradoxical statement, and it is a very much contradictory statement, I can say, which creates a kind of striking effect in the study of poetry. Let me share the screen. Well, we understood that Clint Brooks was a new critic, and he was an active member of the new critical movement. And in this particular essay, he outlines the use of reading poem through paradox, which is a very effective method of critical interpretation, according to Brooks. So paradox can serve as a method of critical interpretation. So paradox is a kind of tension at the surface of a poem, of a verse, and this tension can lead to apparent contradictions and hypocrisies. We understood it in yesterday's lecture. Now let's try to understand something about the terms like connotations and denotations, which you must have studied in your TYBA G3 paper, okay, in semantics especially. So connotation and denotation are two linguistic terms used in semantics especially. So denotation is a dictionary meaning, whereas connotation is an associated meaning or additional meaning that is given by the context, by the speakers, etc. So it is a peripheral meaning, we can say. It is not the central meaning. Denotation is the literal or central meaning of that word, whereas connotation is the given meaning. It may change from culture to culture. For example, when we say to a man that you are behaving like a woman may not have denotations, it has connotations. The connotations such as weak, etc. Go. Actually, I'm not saying that that is my opinion, I'm giving an example. When we say You are a woman to a man, so that word woman has connotations. It stands for weakness, okay, or timidness, we can say. I'm not at all in favor of such kind of things. Just I'm giving you for the sake of examples. So in this essay, Brooks emphasizes how the language of poetry is different from that of sciences. So in science, when you utter a word, that word has that meaning itself. It does not have any other meaning. When you say S2O, so S2O has that same meaning. It is water only. No other meaning is there. But when you use that word water in literature as a simile, as a metaphor, okay, then time it has a different connotation. For example, when we say literature fulfills your thirst, literature fulfills your thirst means what? Literature is being compared here with water. Is that clear? So there is a connotative meaning. Whereas the language of poetry is altogether different from that of sciences because of its connotative meaning, its emphasis on connotative meaning. In science, we only have denotations. In engineering, in technology, we mean what we say. But in literature, an author, a poet may mean more than what he says or what she says. That is connotation. So Brooke claims that he is interested in our seeing that the paradoxes spring from the very nature of the poet's language. So first of all, he tries to underline the fact that the language of science is different from the language of poetry. The language of poetry is different from that of the sciences because the language of poetry depends on connotations, whereas the language of science depends on denotations. So I clearly told you that a salt in science is salt itself. Okay, whereas a salt in language of poetry has different meanings. For example, when somebody says love is the salt of life, so here salt does not have the literal meaning of the salt that we consume every day. That salt stands for what you call the taste of life. Life becomes more interesting, more what we call joyous because of love. That's what it suggests. So that is connotation. So Brooks is interested in our seeing, the reader seeing that the paradoxes come from, origin from the very nature of poet's language. So he says paradox is a language in which connotations. So I told you the meaning of connotations, the additional meaning, the associative meaning. You must have studied in semantics, 7 types of meaning. Okay, social meaning, referential meaning. Okay, then what literary meaning, etc. So paradox is a language in which the connotations play as great a part as the denotations. Okay, denotations, as I said, are literal meanings. Dictionary, whatever meaning you come across in dictionary is denotative meaning. Means it does not have additional meaning. For example, I just now mentioned the name of salt. Salt, when I say give me some salt, that is the denotative meaning. You are asking for salt itself, not for something else. But when you say take it with a pinch of salt, so take this particular statement with a pinch of salt. So then you are suggesting some other meaning. So connotative meaning is a suggested meaning. It is not the conveyed meaning. In denotation, what happens? The meaning itself is there. There is no meaning beyond that. whereas in connotation, it is up to the understanding interpretation of the reader. So that is what the language of paradox is. Language of paradox is full of connotations, and it is up to us to understand these connotations. Okay. Now he tries to explain this particular point. What is the point? That the language of paradox is full of connotations. In the language of paradox, the connotations play as a great part as the denotations. Means in the language of poetry is the language of paradox, we can say. And he tries to explain it with the help of two poems by William Wordsworth. The first poem is "It is a beauteous evening, calm and free," and the second one is "Composed upon Westminster Bridge." So he tries to explain his point by giving the examples of two poems by William Wordsworth and one more poem by John Donne. The title of the poem is Canonization. Now let's try to understand how he explains the language of paradox with reference to William Wordsworth's "It's a Beauteous Evening, Calm and Free." This poem is available online. You can read it online. I'm not going to read the poem over here. So, by giving an example of this poem or this poem, Brooks illustrates how the language of paradox is used. So he refers to the first poem, "It is a beauteous evening, calm and free." So he begins by outlining the initial and surface conflict. He means Brooks. First of all, he reads the poem and outlines. So this is the poem. I hope you can see the poem. It's a beauteous evening, calm and free. It is available on internet. You can read the poem. So it's a beauteous evening, calm and free. The holy time is quiet as a nun, breathless and with adoration. The broad sun is sinking down in tranquility. The gentleness of heaven broods over the sea. Listen, the mighty being is awake, and doth with his eternal motion make a soul like thunder everlastingly. Dear child, dear girl, what walkest with me here? If thou appear untouched by solemn thought, the nature is not therefore less divine. Thou liest in Abraham's bosom all the year, and worshipest the temples in a shrine, God being with thee when we know it not. So this is a short poem, maybe of 14 lines. So a poem of 14 lines is a sonnet form. I haven't counted the lines. I'm not sure about it. It's a short poem. And in this short poem, Wordsworth, outlines, not Wordsworth, I'm sorry. This kind of disturbances create a problem. So Brooks begins by outlining the initial and surface conflict. He outlines the initial and surface means which can be easily seen, which is apparent, okay, which does not require much efforts to see. Surface is the opposite term of deep, we can say. So what is this uh, surface conflict? It is that the speaker is filled with worship. The speaker of the poem is filled with worship, while there is a female companion, a girl, a child, and this female companion does not seem to have that worship in her mind. He's talking about this. The speaker is filled with worship, and his female companion does not seem to be. But in the end, Brooks discovers the paradox. What is this? The paradox is that The girl is more full of worship than the speaker precisely. Initially, the speaker tries to claim that he is filled with worship for God, whereas the girl is not having any kind of worship in her mind. But in the end, when we go on reading the poem, Brooks points out the paradox, the opposite thing. Paradox is something which is contradictory to what is said earlier. Okay, so the paradox is that the girl is more full of worship than the speaker precisely. Why? Because she is always consumed with sympathy for nature. The girl has a kind of sympathy for nature. Okay, so as is the speaker uh, in tune with nature while immersed in it. She is not like the speaker. The speaker tries to state that you should know, find God, the divine thing in nature. But this girl seems to be consumed with nature itself. She's fully with nature. And that's what makes him realize, the speaker, that this girl is more devotional than what he is. Her worship is more effective because she's fully one. She's become one with nature. And when you become one with nature, you become one with God. That's what he realizes. So worshipping the God in the temple, worshipping the God in some other what you call religious place does not have that effect as you worship nature. So that's what he's trying to say. Okay, this is the contradiction that Brooks finds in this particular poem. It is a beauteous evening, calm and free. So paradox, as I mentioned earlier, is a tension at the surface of a verse, which can lead apparent contradiction and hypocrisies. So what we realize here is that the speaker claims his worship more powerful than that of the girl. But eventually, there is a contradiction. The girl is fully one. She is immersed. Immersed means she has become one with nature. And the hypocrisy of the speaker is revealed. So this is how we understand the use of paradox, the language of paradox in poetry.